Hello and welcome. My name is Nathaniel Skinner. I am the lead designer behind Helheim Unbound, and I'm here today to present Champion Creation. I have here in front of me the form-fillable version of the champion sheet, and so we're just going to run through really quickly and create a character so you can see how quick and easy it is and how flexible it is to help you make the champion that you want for your setting in your game session, basically with no restrictions. So we will give our champion their name. We'll call them Ythrax the Bold. Player will be me, Nat. We'll say that they're 5 feet, 3 inches tall, 140 pounds, gender, neutered. Age, we'll say that they're 230. Birth date unknown. And what I'm driving at here is that this will just be a champion for a generically fantasy or sci-fi based. We'll see what I'm feeling like when we get to the next page. But just this is all the basic stuff, and the good thing is it doesn't truly matter from a gameplay perspective, so you can be creative and have the champion you want. We'll say that they're a lizard man. Culture. Culture will be Ataxian. Languages, they will speak Common and Ataxian. So description and background, again, this is just narrative. Ythrax is a freighter loadmaster. Short for the lizardmen. Has green scales with a electric blue undercoat, long incisors or eye teeth, and has a orange crest running from the top of his head down to between his shoulders. And we'll change them from neutered to asexual. So down to between its shoulders. Accomplished deeds. During the evacuation of a planet, we'll just keep it vague for now, he used his load mastering skills to successfully load and balance a town of 1,500 lizardmen and escape the planet's destruction. Sounds like something that would bring a otherwise relatively calm career into the limelight. So turning now to desires. Desires are what our lizardman wants out of the world. Wants to gain pilot training. Wants to return to Ataxia. And a third desire or area for gameplay is wants to depose Captain Haxatar. And we'll say here, for purposes of building some of the narrative, Captain Haxatar was the captain when Ythrax was the loadmaster, and he wanted to just flee the planet and basically leave everybody to die. So now we've already built in one potential antagonist into our campaign. There's then a field for notes, which for now we will leave blank, but it's a great place just to jot things down on the fly since you'll have your character sheet in front of you, even if you want to move it into other notes in the long term. Turning to the second page now, we have the skills, description, the number of dice, their breadth. We have traits. So I'm going to jump down to traits. And we will say that as a standard beneficial trait, Orange Crest. Within the mythology of the Ataxians, orange crests are viewed a little bit more better than the rest of society. It's just a rare breeding, doesn't happen very often. We will give them a trait of long fangs. So his fangs are longer, can be used as a weapon. And then for his last trait, we will say titanium tipped claws. And we'll say that these claws were the reward that he earned for the time that he spent saving that planet. It was a gift. And they're a status symbol rather than something that he uses in combats. They've been etched with the names in tiny script of each one of the people who he saved. And then lastly, for his last trait, which is a good trait, we'll say that he has the funds to acquire his own ship. And this will kind of hold aside and would develop through gameplay as an opportunity if he deposes the captain. This would perhaps pay for all the fees of legally acquiring the ship once he learns how to fly it for Ataxia to use. And we'll just put in a little note here that Ataxia is a highly legalistic society. So that's laid out all of the traits that you start with. If we wanted to give a couple extra time points, we could give a negative trait, but for this character, we'll skip it. Popping over to word, each champion starts with 4 word by default. No particular extra resources, so just kind of run-of-the-mill things. He was a loadmaster, which is not the most glamorous of career choices. But things are starting to go on the up and up for our lizard man. So for skills, through creating the background, we've already determined that his being a loadmaster is something that he's really bloody good at. And so we'll say quartermaster. And we'll say that this is anything to do with purchasing, loading, supply, etc. So really, anytime anything to do with cargo, our champion knows how to deal with it, including the value of goods, everything else. And we've already laid out that he's pretty good at it, so we'll give 8 dice, which is considered master skill. Because quartermastering is a skill that's not used that often, I would say that probably standard. And so out of our starting points, we've now used 12 of them, so we have 14 points left. For his next skill, our loadmaster is a rough and tumble type, so we will say brawling. Use of claws, fangs, and limbs to inflict damage. And he's more of an amateur at it, and because the brawling skill is basically just unarmed combat, single type of thing you're doing, we'll say that it's a 4-point and narrow skill. So I should talk a little bit about the breadth of skills. Breadth reflects increasing amounts of point cost to gain and improve a skill. A narrow skill is something that is tightly focused or would not be used very frequently. So for example, brawling, that's one way to fight. If this were to be a particular type of gun instead, so we'll say a Lizardman laser blaster, then it would be a narrow skill. If it was pistols, so generally skilled in the use of pistols, that would be a standard skill. So our champion is basically adept at any sort of pistol that they pick up. The broadest level would be firearms master. And that means that if they pick up any sort of lighter weapon, rifles, submachine guns, pistols, anything like that, they're skilled at it. But it's going to take most of the champion's points to get it from the get-go, as well as be slower to improve. Another advantage of having narrower skills is that if something is related, And this right here will be a bit of a stretch, but it's what we have written up. So if he were to be trying to load up crates and crates of martial arts gear or brawling gear, brass knuckles, switchblades, things like that, we might say that he could add a bonus die to his quartermastering skill in loading up, because he knows that none of that stuff is particularly easy to break. It's all highly durable. And so that's another advantage from having some overlap to your skills, is that in certain situations they can provide additional bonuses. So we're down to 10 points left. And another skill that we'll give him is Lizard Man Law. Knowledge of legal procedures, proceedings, etc. And so, as rough and tumble as he is, perhaps there's been a lot of encounters with the law, spent a lot of times in an Ataxian courtroom, so he knows how the law works. This one we'll say again is a standard skill and a 4. So he's been enough, read some books, perhaps all that time in deep space, kind of an amateur lawyer. And so he has some knowledge of how the Lizard Man Law works, which might help him when he comes to deposing the captain. And then the last skill we'll give him is Mechanic. And we'll say that Mechanic is fixing things. And we will make this one 2 points in a broad skill. So in his time, he's spent hitting things with hammers, tightening screws, fiddling with devices. He's not particularly good at it, but it's an area he's continuing to develop. And it's a broad skill because we've scoped it here. It's, generally speaking, fixing things. And so pretty much anything, he's got a chance of tinkering with it, becoming a little bit better. The last item that I'll cover is trials, which is here on the right-hand side. So a trial is any time your character is actually challenged in gameplay. It allows them to organically increase their skill. So for example, with the quartermaster, typically he has 8 dice. I should say it has 8 dice. And if it were to be an exceptionally heavy cargo with all sorts of weird packages, and perhaps the ship is damaged, so there's some extra yaw rotation, and it is a difficulty 9 test, hardest test in the game you can do, to make this perfectly balanced. And we'll set ourselves an insanely high goal. Just by undertaking that, you would check off a trial. It doesn't matter if your champion passes or fails, it's trying something that's beyond their normal skill and expectation. And for a narrow skill, you need to complete 2 trials. For a standard skill 3 and a broad skill 4. So getting back to the earlier point about the advantage of narrow skills is that they can improve much more often. You can only complete a trial once per session. And so that means, all else being equal, the brawling skill will advance about a third more quickly than Lizard Man Law, even if every single session they're being used. Once you've complete the trials, you add another dice to your die pool, cross them out, and start all over again. And so that way then there's also organic elements to what your champion is doing, how the narrative is playing, and encouraging you to take risks. So with that, that's champion creation in a nutshell. And again, this is Nat Skinner, the lead designer of Helheim Unbound. Hope you have a good day. Cheers.